it is, our $125 mountain bike that we found on Facebook Marketplace. I feel like bike prices have returned to planet Earth. A 6-year-old Dick's Sporting Goods GT that's not in awesome condition probably should cost $100 to $150. So this is a good thing, and actually there's a lot we can do with this bike. For a very reasonable investment, we can make this a really solid hardtail that's a lot more up to date. And so I'm gonna tear this bike apart and show you what I have found for it. Said this several times on Flip Bike now. You try to pull this crank arm off and you are going to be wasting your time. You can bang on it, you can pry. You need a crank puller to get it off, and I'm going to show you why. This is a square taper crank set, and you're really only going to find these on budget bikes nowadays, but they're fine. This square over here that the crank arm slides onto is tapered. It gets a little bit wider towards the base, and so it gets tighter and tighter the further down the spindle it moves. You just don't have a prayer of getting it off without that same force pulling it back in the other direction. Also down here, we have this bottom bracket bearing. If you want to take that out, technically you need a special tool, but the truth is, most of us when we were kids just put a big channel lock around this metal piece and it's fine. It's a big steel ring. It's gonna get scratched up, but it's not a big deal. And so yes, if you just need to do one of these restorations to get a bike going and get into mountain biking, you can avoid certain tools, but there are tools like the crank puller that you can't really get around. I get that everybody has a budget, and so you get an Amazon special crank puller and hope you don't pull the threads out of your crank. This pedal has clearly been in the bike for a very long time. Feels like it was cross-threaded all the way in, but actually it was cross-threaded all the way in. So the threads in this crank arm are shot. That means we can't safely thread in a new pedal without doing a repair on this. Now, it can be repaired. Sometimes you can just clean it up with a tap, which we're gonna try, but an even more damaged thread can be fixed with an insert. You drill it out to the next size, you put in the insert, and it's saved. The problem is those inserts are often pricey. If we can't fix this with a tap, then we're gonna replace it. At this point, we've got one filthy bike frame and a bunch of filthy parts, so we're gonna clean them up and get to work. As I dig deeper into this bike, the front chain rings are all chewed up, the headset is gone, but then strangely, the cassette barely has any wear on it whatsoever. The tires still have plenty of tread. Even the bottom bracket cleaned up really nice. It's still smooth, just doesn't have any grease in it. It's all dried out. There are actually bearings here that you can get down to and just pop the covers off of. Then we can just add more grease. We don't have to go crazy. We don't have to remove the cartridges or replace the bearings. You can just put grease in it and the thing runs like new. These wheels are actually in great shape. There's like no dings or scratches on them. The hubs feel like they're in great shape, but I want to throw them on the truing stand, make sure they're perfectly straight, make sure the spokes haven't gotten loose, and you don't even really need a truing stand. I've showed in other videos how you can actually line up wheels with a zip tie. Your bike multi-tool might even come with a spoke wrench in it. Now, something that's more or less fine, we can probably just leave it, is the fork. It's a Suntour XCM. These are really basic and really neglect tolerant, but it has been neglected pretty good. And so we're gonna take it apart, we're gonna clean everything up and replace the wiper seals and bushings because they're really inexpensive. It's super easy to do. And in doing this service, we're basically resetting the fork back to day one. You do not need seal drivers for these. You can just push them down with your hands. You do need a special tool to properly remove these caps, but you can also 3D print one, and it'll work just fine. These old Chester pedals actually cleaned up really nicely, but if we take the time to replace the pins, they're gonna look outstanding. Replacing pedal pins is pretty labor intensive, but the result is pretty nice. And we have to replace the pedals because the old one got completely stripped out. And now we move on to that crank arm that's no longer good. I strongly considered just running a tap through this to clean up the threads, but it's just way too far gone. There's no way I could do that and feel good about it riding down the trail, standing on the pedals, and so we're not gonna do that. Now, if this was an expensive crank arm or a difficult to replace vintage crank arm, we could save it, but given the cost of a new set of aluminum crank arms, we're just gonna throw them in the garbage and replace them. And then I think we have everything we need to put this bike together and make it run better than new. Now, something I'm keeping in mind here is this was a $125 Facebook find. I wanna bring it up to date, make it a really good bike that's still budget. And then we're gonna take it out on the trail and see how it performs. So the drivetrain I'm installing on this bike is Shimano Q's, and I'm surprised this hasn't made that big of a splash. This is like Shimano's new low-end stuff. They didn't even have to make it this nice. This is $100, not the derailleur. The derailleur, the shifter, the cassette, and the chain are $100 altogether. That's what I bought it for retail. And they all work on HG free hub bodies. That's not like the new micro spline type. That's what you would find on any cassette from an older bike, a budget wheel set. And now that I'm finding Shimano hydraulic disc brakes for $30, we will have put $130 worth of brakes and drivetrain into a $125 bike. So we're gonna have a serious mountain bike for that price. This is a really good time to get into this sport. I'm gonna see if I have a derailleur hanger that fits this bike, and if I don't, I'm going to align it. 9 times out of 10, if you can't get the bike to shift by just making adjustments, it's the derailleur hanger. So the bike has these little cable clamps on the down tube, all of which have gone brittle and snapped. And so I 3D printed some new ones. They just go around the cable and then go into the frame with an M5. So I'm gonna replace all of these to keep these cables secure. Then we have to fix this mess up front. This front brake hose just doesn't wanna point in the direction I want it to. But if you apply a little bit of heat, bend the hose in the direction you want it to go, and then let it cool down, it'll usually stay. I think this is ready to go. I want to take it for a ride, but first, we should stare at it. Taking our GT Ricochet for a ride, and so far so good. I've been climbing and it shifts really smoothly. Shimano Q's feels like Shimano, which is to say it shifts smoothly and it's not finicky at all. And it's very clicky. It's kind of indistinguishable from Dior XT. I just know that it's heavier. And the bike is heavy, and you can feel that, but you can get into a low gear and just wind up the hill. Now, there are also a number of things that we didn't do to this bike. For example, I didn't put a dropper post on it. I also didn't install a shorter stem and wider bars like I normally would. But with this new drivetrain, with the clutch and everything, I want to see how this bike descends. When I first bought this bike, I had ridden it as is to prove a point, and since then there's been some massive improvements. First of all, the volume of the bike has been reduced drastically. It is so quiet. We replaced the headset. We tightened a lot of things down. We added a derailleur that has a clutch. The bike sounds and feels a lot more mechanically sound. The bike also feels better when climbing because previously it had 175mm cranks. It's a size medium, that's huge. The new crank arms we put on there are 170mm. The next one doesn't change the way the bike rides, but it makes me feel better. It has bar ends now, so we're not gonna get core sampled, and we fixed all those issues with a sketchy stem. And so what's the bottom line? What did this bike and everything we put on it actually cost us? $356 for everything. And so I'm gonna list this bike for sale for $400, and unless somebody is willing to pay that, I'm not selling it. It would be criminal to sell it for less than that. This bike has hydraulic disc brakes, it has a really good drivetrain, and it needs nothing. You can ride it into the sunset. I have so many inquiries on this bike right now, so I'm about to clean it up because I took it on a ride. I'm gonna sell it. Most quick releases, you just pull them, so you have to push this in. So there you go, we sold our first flip bike since before the bike apocalypse, and so it's back on. I should have priced that bike higher, but I just saw so many good deals on Facebook Marketplace, I thought $400 was fair. But I think there were a lot of people who wanted a bike that needed nothing. Even if a bike only needs a couple of things, I have lots of tools and lots of parts, and so that's no big deal to me. I overlook that. If you enjoyed this video, you could have had it 2 weeks early on Substack. We also post exclusive weekly articles from some of the most interesting voices in mountain biking. Even if you sign up on the free tier, we try to drop freebies every now and again. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, I hope you at least found it entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.